Welcome to New Mexico Black Rifle Operators Union. I'm your host, Sean. Yesterday, we got interrupted by my pup going out, needing to go outside, where he promptly ran into the post on the on my table on the way out the door, and you heard him yelp a couple times. Today, I've made sure Jag has been able to go outside. So, I was thinking about some things, and I've been watching lots of podcasts, as you can tell. One of the cool things I saw is I've seen a couple different hosts talk about how they've got into the 2A. Tim Pool was talking about his favorite gun, and it was a .357 lever action. You know, probably a Henry, or maybe a Winchester, maybe a Marlin, maybe a Rossi. But it leads me to start with, where did I start? Well, to be honest, my brother Rick, who I love, and we used to, in our adolescence, all my brothers used to go out in this place very close to town. There used to be a place behind the college where I used to work, but way back in the day, before the town developed and got bigger, we used to be able to shoot back there. And we used to rabbit hunt a lot back there. My brother gave me a Remington Nylon 22 long rifle. Now, mine wasn't the typical one that had a tube magazine. Mine was brown, and it had a magazine that you could actually insert into it. A 10-round magazine, little curved thing. Now, my brother Rick had his house broken into, and they stole my first rifle, because my brother Rick, he kept it for me, mostly because we didn't have a gun safe, and he wanted to make sure I wasn't a turd kid taking the gun out and go out and doing stuff, because he gave it to me when I was fairly young. I was like 5 or 6. But it was my first gun. That's what started me on shooting. Started me shooting daily almost. My brothers and I used to spend a lot of time just out messing around in the woods, shooting, tracking down rabbits. Rabbit was a pretty staple in our family diet. That's why I don't have any problems with hunting rabbits or hunting in general. But the other gun that came second was actually a Spanish Mauser, and my dad bought it for me as my first hunting rifle. It was a 7mm Mauser. It was one of the only ones I've ever seen of the, I think they're 97 Mausers, meaning 1897 models or 1896, either one of them. But mine had a very good headspace, which was weird, because I've had 2 of those outside of the one I had originally. I would love to get my original one back, just for familial reasons. We couldn't afford to blue it at first, and it had this really crappy paint job that was done. But my brother Ron got a can of Krylon, and we stripped it down, and between Rick and Ron and myself, we painted it. It looked pretty sharp. But what I remember was that my brothers had brand new lever action rifles. That's what Dad got them. That's because he could afford it, because they were on special. That there used to be a store in northwest New Mexico called Best, and they were going out of business, and Dad caught them on a great deal. And that was my brother's first deer hunting rifle that I think Dad bought them. Now, I was envious as hell because theirs was brand new and mine was military rework. I didn't realize that the caliber difference was a huge discrepancy. A 30-30 versus a 7mm Mauser, there's a big difference. A 7mm Mauser will take an elk, no problem. I've done it. But Dad had an 8mm. It's now sitting in my safe. It's been converted to an 8.6. And when it first came out, it was a, standard K98. But Dad's had the traditional laminate stock, but someone had sporterized it in a very beautiful fashion and had finished it, and it looked great. And I just loved that stock. Well, Dad eventually upgraded his stock, so he gave me that one. And he bought a fiberglass stock, Douglas stock, and had it, or Macmillan stock, and had it fiber bedded and the whole bit. But we were, back then, we were under the impression, all of us kids anyway, that military surplus was it. I mean, you could get one of these, put a scope on it, and get pretty much what you could get out of a boxed rifle, brand new boxed rifle. That is nowhere near truth. Today, if you were going to buy surplus, you do it because you like surplus. If you're expecting minute of angle or MOA accuracy out of surplus rifles, you're dreaming. When they were first incepted, 3 MOA at 100 yards or 100 meters was acceptable. 6 MOA at that range was acceptable. So the guns weren't designed to be extremely accurate. The other one that influenced me around the same time was the German Luger, and it's just the classic timely look of it. Now, my dad had always been enamored by the 1911, and I'll get to that. The 1911 is a great gun. My Uncle Phil had 2 of them, and 1911s, not Lugers. No one in my family had a Luger, but my dad had one back in the day, and he used to tell me stories about it all the time. And the closest I could get to it was the Ruger Mark I or Mark II pistols. Now, my uncle had a Mark I that he used to lend my dad when we'd go camping, and Dad and I would go shoot it at family reunions and stuff just to get away from the hustle and bustle. When Dad needed some quiet time, I think he'd take me out shooting. But it was a great way to walk around, and I remember shooting at a squirrel during squirrel season that just happened to happen during a family reunion. And we were shooting at this thing at about 75, 100 yards, and we hit it, and we ate it with that pistol. They're accurate. The one thing I noticed about the Mark I is it didn't have a slide hold back then. They're accurate. They're great pistols. The Mark IVs, I would probably buy one if I hadn't bought an SR-22 pistol to kind of train with or train my kids with because it's closer to a Glock. The other gun was the M1 Garand. Now, my dad had one. He's had 3 that I can remember during my lifespan. First one he got was a 308 convert from a Korean War convert. One of the ones that was chambered for .6 originally been re-barreled and rechambered for a 308. The problem was the person that had done it had not gassed the system correctly. And the gun tended to bind and would be sometimes 6 inches, sometimes a foot off, and up or down or left or right. Dad eventually sold it. The second one he got was after a surgery. He got an M1 that was just come back from re-arsenalling, I think. And it had all the good stamps on it and stuff. It was beautiful. Okay? Dad got in a Titan, sold it. It was accurate as hell. Sometime in the later part of my dad's life, he got this M1 Garand I built a 308 for my brother, who had bought it from my dad, who'd got yet again in a Titan. And he decided that he wasn't going to use it, but as we've always said, none of our guns leave our family. So it was, I want this. If you can build this, I'll give you this. So there was no question for me. And building a 308 or an AR-10 is a hell of a lot cheaper than buying a modern M1 Garand or an M1 Garand, original M1 Garand like mine. Mine was made in 1937, 1938, right as they were spinning up production. It's early production. That's why I love it. I have 2 of them. I have a Tanker carbine, which is a Winchester version. But it's an .6 also. And that would have been a re-weld remake at the end of the wars to try to sell what they had for M1s. Now we get to the black rifles. Okay. So when I was younger, you have to understand in the late 80s or mid 80s, early 90s, the AR-15 was everywhere. You could even get the M16. When I remember going to the gun store, you could purchase one with the giggle switch. That was how far back. So this was pre-1986. But they were squarely out of my family's price range. You have to understand, my dad and my mom were all working class. And any money I got was through chores or through side jobs with Dad. And we didn't have, $700, $800 or $1,000 back in the day. And that's what they were going for, $600, $700. So what we had seen was AKs were really cheap. And AKs had a reputation for reliability, and they do. And they're great. I will tell you, they're not infallible. No gun is. But I was able to get into an AK, a Mac 90, and that was my first black rifle. And I was probably 16 or 17 when that happened. And when I started driving, this rifle went everywhere with me. That or a Mini 14. Because I saw the utility of having a handy mid, or what do they call it? Mid-caliber is the best way I can think of it. It's not a full-size cartridge, but it'll get the job done for most game. And it definitely would stop stuff. But it was the bad guy gun. And I got the reputation of liking bad guy guns, which is kind of deserved, I guess, for the AK. I personally think it's one of those guns that's got a bad rep because it was what our opposites had. You know, the commies carried AKs. Drug dealers carried AKs. But in reality, it's a very utilitarian rifle. It's a tractor. Or the AR-15 is like a fighter jet. But in my progress to get the AK, there was this middle step before that where I got an SKS. Because my friend, Dexton, had been given one for his birthday, and this time you could get them for about $60 to $100. You can get a case of them. I think that's what his bio dad did. And Dad, I think, helped clean it up with Royce. And they gave it to him at his birthday party, and I was so envious of my friend Dexton because he got an SKS. And it's like, that was as close as you could get to an AK in our age group, but still be a hunting rifle. I know Dexton has dropped deer. I've dropped deer with SKS. The 7.62x39, I've dropped them with SKS and AK. My brothers have actually shot and killed deer with 223s, and have been very successful at doing it. So I know it can be done, and in New Mexico, there was a point in time it was perfectly legal to. Nowadays I would be a little hesitant to, having dropped a few mule deer in my life and seeing how big they are. They are at least double the size of a whitetail, at the very minimum. Okay? So my brothers have, since they're not technically my biological brothers, that was never a thing in my family. We didn't care. My brothers were my brothers. They're still my brothers. But they have a cousin named Jeff. And he bought an HK91. And it was either Rick or Ron, and Dad went out with us, and we got to shoot that HK91. And I'll never forget the fluting on it, nor could I remember the HK slap and how cool the rifle looked. We come back from shooting, and Dad, a couple days later, bought me that MP5 cap gun. And that's what started me loving the MP5. It's a great trainer, if nothing else, because you did have to do the HK slap to make the cap go into the quasi chamber and go off when you squeeze the trigger. But I love the HKs because of that, I think, because of the nostalgia involved. But back to my brother's new guns. One of them had a Winchester Model 94, which in my family is my Uncle Phil had a collection from 2520 up to 4570. And my dad had used them, had one back in the day. He had a couple that he ended up trading or whatever. One was a 44 Magnum. One was a 30-30. They're all top ejects. I think Ronnie's was a side eject. It was one of the first ones that came out because both of theirs had optics, if I remember right. And Rick, and maybe I've got them reversed. Maybe Ronnie had the Marlin and Rick had the Winchester. I forget. But I remember them taking it apart to clean it and to put it in a bag so that as they transferred, this is right when my brothers started moving back to the East Coast and the South. They went to Virginia and then to South Carolina. But in that move, I remember them taking apart the Marlin 336 and how cool it was. You know, it was kind of like the rifleman's gun. Now, when we talk about the 1911s, my mom and my dad and my Uncle Phil always thought the 1911 was the end-all, be-all caliber and carry gun. And I carried one. I bought a lightweight Officer's Combat Edition. And I got a screaming deal thanks to my friend who used to work at a pawn shop. Guy backed out on the deal. I was looking for a concealed carry after buying a Star 9mm, which failed us very bad and put a hole in one of my friend's trucks. And I sold a Ruger P89. Back then, you could sell it, no problem. So my dad had gotten me into a P89 after the Star debacle, and I'd sold it so I could get the money, or add to the money I had saved for my first 1911, which is still in my safe. It's also one of the guns that's appraised at an unreasonably high price, because apparently it was one of the last years that that Colt was American before it started swapping hands back and forth. Fast forward to now. I switched from 1911s because the guns I have are more collectors than daily carry, and I didn't want to mar them. So my first entry was into a daily concealed carry gun was actually a Springfield XDS. And by and large, it was horrible for me. Now, one of my really good best friends has it now, and he's not had any of the issues I've had, but it's been to the factory before he got it 4 times. Okay, I got my first Glock, which was a Glock 26, still here, still running, close to 4,000 or 5,000 rounds on it, because I'd been through several training classes, several courses of fire, several just shooting trips in general. It has been one of the most reliable pistols I've ever owned. That's why I would stake my life on it, which led to me buying my Glock 19, which is just as reliable. So that's how I got to where I'm at. And probably what influenced my love for certain firearms. I will never forget the trip with Jeff, and I want to say it was Ronnie, that we shot that HK91, because I think Rick was in Indiana at the time, and Ronnie had just cruised through here, and he was talking to his family on his biological mother's side, and had talked to Jeff. And Jeff was reloading, and that's how Dad got involved, is he was trying to do something with reloads that required more expertise than he had. But Dad, being the hand loader he was, and what he trained all of us with, was a resource, just like I try to be for my friends and family when they reload, because reloading is one of those things you don't want to mess up. If you screw this up, you're dead. So I thought this would be a good story because it leads off to where I'm at now. Now, I own an AR-15. It's custom. I say I built it, but I assembled it from exactly every part I wanted to. The gun is exactly what I would want if I had bought like a Daniel Defense. The only thing is, mine doesn't have some of those Gucci parts. Do I begrudge someone for buying Gucci guns? No. Maybe they don't have the expertise I do, where I can change and swap parts at will and get the gun to work again. Okay? There's a lot of expertise that I've garnered over the years and sought out to become almost an armorer when it comes to AR-15s. And I've gotten just about as good with the AK after building one now. And I say only building one, but there's a lot of learning that happens when you build something. And the AK, you have to build. There is no partial assembly. There is nothing. You may get a bag of parts, but you have to build the gun around it, literally. And that is a good thing for the 2A community, because then if you're starting to build guns, you start understanding what happens, how they lock up, what they do, what the safeties are in it. And I'm not just talking about the gun not going off, but after it goes off, you're containing explosions inches away from your face or your body, and it's doing it reliably without blowing up in your face. This is why I say reloading is a very important thing to get right. The same thing goes for armoring and head spacing and checking your rifle out to do stuff. When I tell you to, or when we talk about cleaning guns, you want to inspect what you have so that you see if there's any cracks or any fissures or anything that needs to be replaced or taken care of. Because if you use your gun, you're going to wear it out. That's just part of the machine. That's also part of the fun of being able to make it yours. Because maybe you couldn't afford that Gucci barrel or that Gucci foreign when you built your gun or assembled your gun. Maybe you can now, because now you just have to buy that one part. And that's where I love the 2A community, is because we have these niches covered. That's why it's so frustrating to see us separate ourselves into these little silos and get pissed off at one another. Well, you don't need that to hunt deer. Well, what do you care why they have it? It's not your business. It's their right. And that's where I'm at nowadays, is I understand more now than I ever have why people like black rifles or those Tupperware pistols. Those were squarely off limits. I bought a shotgun after I turned 30-something because I was never allowed to have one. Why? My dad wanted me to be a rifleman. That's a single-shot thing. You one shot, one kill type of mentality. You have 9 opportunities in the air with buckshot. Yeah, you're not really a hunter then at that my point. However, you hunt birds, you try to use a rifle, you're probably going to kill someone way far away from where you're shooting, but in addition, your chances of success are dramatically less because you only have one projectile going up in the air to take down a duck or a goose, and that's why shotguns are there. They also end a fight in a hell of a hurry for defensive purposes. Do I think it should be your first gun? Oh, hell no. I have been shooting since I was 5 or 6. I know how to manipulate a firearm very well. I have taken it upon myself to get trained. At that, I have yet to find a shotgun class that was just a dedicated shotgun class. And I would probably take one just to make myself feel that much more confident with that particular device. I just think it's an interesting story of how we get in there. What was your first gun? Where did you go? What did you find? What's different? In amongst this is the Ruger, Blackhawk. I'll never forget, that was the first gun my dad bought in a .357 that my mom loved. And she was very good with it. My brother Rick has a .357 to this day, I believe. And he uses it for hunting. He's dropped deer with it. He's done a number of things with it. He is a single-shot type person, a one-shot, one-kill person. I've even known him to carry it for self-defense. Is it the best option? No. Is it an option? Absolutely. A .357 is a game changer. I mean, you're not going to mug someone with a .357 slug in you. I would have some debates over being able to manipulate it fast enough in a hurry. I'd also say, after being raised around revolvers and shooting semi-automatics, the chances of something failing on a semi-automatic or you having a jam or something, yeah, that's a thing. Is it easier to clear than if you have a real bad malfunction with a revolver? Absolutely. Because you're talking about drop the mag, rack the slide, check everything out, you're good to go, throw a new mag in, continue down, rack the slide, go forward into whatever you're doing. In a revolver, if the cartridge is stuck in there, or all the cartridges are stuck in there, in the bail, or the cylinder, how do you get them out? Okay, in a timely fashion. What happens if the trigger becomes so gritty that it locks up and the hammer doesn't fall? Or the hammer is so locked up because there's crap inside the receiver of the gun that doesn't allow the hammer to fall. Those are things that people talk about all the time, saying, well, the revolver is the most reliable gun ever. Yes and no. When it fails big. And that needs to be addressed, especially for new shooters, because that's terrifying for them. I look forward to this upcoming week to being able to take my son and his friends out shooting, because they're about to go back off to college. So we're going to their mama of his friends is pretty much an anti-2A person. But the kid's very curious because of video games. My son's friend is. So I told him to collect a list, and we'll start figuring out what we can take out to shoot. I hope you have a great weekend. Like, share, subscribe, be great.